Okay, welcome to Philly.net Hands-On Lab, July edition. And if you were in the studio audience here, you would see that our numbers are dwindling. That often happens in the summer. But of course, since we're streaming live, maybe others will be out there and follow along. And of course, we record. Sir, if you could, we're trying to keep everybody up on this end so that the speaker can focus. Excellent.
That's the height of the barrier right there.
Yes.
Which is fine. I'll try.
All right. So tonight we're going to go into ASP.NET Core, but it's going to be SignalR and a little bit about the Azure stuff also, Azure tooling. The presenters are going to be Chris Gomez, Rob Kaiser, and
I don't have it.
whatever. SignalR. We're gonna learn all about SignalR. It'll be fun. So I sent out an email today, and Chris has a copy of that on the screen. So the next meeting we have is in 2 weeks. And that meeting is what we always do in the summer. We have a meeting where we have 10 speakers do very short presentations on something that they think is new and interesting. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. We are still looking for speakers for that night, and you'll see there's a link there that says speakers needed. Please click on that, and you can go register as a speaker. It's a great way to get started. All the sessions we do now are recorded, and Rich posts them to YouTube on the Philly.net channel. And we actually are getting a lot of usage there. A lot of people go back and look at our recordings from all over the country, overseas as well. So it's a good thing we're doing here, and we're going to continue with that. The next lab we're going to have, since we're sort of in July, we're a little later because of July 4th. We pushed everything back a week. So we're going to continue with that in August. So we're not going to have our next lab until August 8th. And that we're going to go into Blazor and WebAssembly. And that is an experimental technology that Microsoft is working with. But we'll at least explain to you why it's important, where we think it's going to go, and then have a bunch of hands-on lessons, and you will actually be able to create useful stuff. For that lab, you're going to have to download some stuff ahead of time, so pay attention to the email invites so that you can get the right bits on your laptop. The last thing, another meeting, you can see up there August 25th. If somebody could edit that, please. I did make a typo. It's August 22nd. But on our Meetup page, it's actually the right date. And what's going to happen that night is that we are going to have a meeting where we join up with the Philadelphia Azure group in this room. So we might have a little bit more of a crowd. And then we're going to have presentations on how to write bots. And the presenters are going to be Andy Schwam and a local MVP, and Rich Ross is going to actually step away from the recording device back there, and we'll have somebody fill in for him as he presents. And the last thing, if you could go back to where you were, sir. All right. Okay. The last thing. This is official. We are going to have a code camp this fall. So let's hear. What do I hear? Woohoo! Everybody say woohoo. That's our favorite thing. So I worked with Rich Ross, and we got permission to use this facility again. However, it has been requested that we cut down the total attendance a little bit. And some of the rooms got a little overcrowded, especially on Friday when we had the full day sessions. For those of you that go to that. So we are going to do a code camp, but it's going to be a little less crowded. And that means it's going to sell out even quicker. So, but you have the date there, mark it in your calendar. And I also, today, as of like 1 o'clock today, I decided on which days I'm going to open the registration. So just mark all that stuff and get ready, and you too can come to the 27th Philly.net Code Camp. So How many are going? That's what I thought. Why not? So, anyways, the other thing, I am working on a new website for that, but you'll learn about that when the time comes, and that is where we're going to be doing the registration and things like evaluations and stuff like that. So, any questions, comments, concerns, criticisms? Wise guy, sit in the front row. All right. At this point in time, I will turn things over to Chris, who has a nice lab all set up for you.
Yeah, so testing 1, 2. It's good, Rich. Test again. All right, good. I forgot to test before we went live. As you can see, rookie here, first time. I think as Bill mentioned, we are live on at mixer.com/philly.net. And what I want to do here is host this from my own channel. So awesome, I'm now hosting me. Yay. And every video we do is here at youtube.com/philly.net, and that's always Philly DOTNET. And you know, we're starting to get some views. Now, you can see here that we are also live now. And that'll take you to a stream on YouTube. We got some great feedback from folks who said, hey, we want to watch some of this stuff, but at work, Mixer and Twitch are considered game websites for some crazy reason. So can you find another way? And so we also host on YouTube. But we usually have somebody manning the Mixer channel and basically moderating here and relaying questions as needed. Now for tonight, we are going to go to Philly.net's fairly new GitHub site at github.com/philly.net, Philly DOTNET. It should be pretty easy for you to find this month's hands-on lab. So if you go to github.com/philly.dotnet, you don't have to download anything from here. You don't have to be familiar with Git. But I want to show you what we have here so that you can both follow along in your browser, and I get a lot of feedback sometimes that people wish they could maybe do this again. So you're going to see that you'll be able to do this again, and this is something we're kind of working on for hands-on labs. So I think we're raising the bar a little bit and increasing the workload, but it should be good. So if you've made it to github.com/philly.dotnet, our very top repository, which is styled this year and date. I don't want to promise anyone that these links are permalinks. As this grows, we might reconfigure. But for tonight, here's today's repo, okay? Even if you don't want to use Git, even if you don't want to download this as a zip file, the Readme has the contents of the lab. So you will be able to cut and paste code instead of if you maybe fall behind a little bit. Or even if it's just too much, like I put way too much code for us to type or something. So we are going to use Visual Studio Code tonight for ASP.NET SignalR. We're going to use .NET Core 2.1, which means you're going to want the .NET Core SDK that's version 2.1.300 or later. And there have been 2 updates since then, including 3.02, which came out yesterday. And I should just advise everybody there was a security vulnerability, 2 of them, related to moving to 3.02 as one way to mitigate. Both vulnerabilities had other mitigations as well, but that's the key with the world today, right? Is you got to keep up with, do I need to move because I want to or because I have to? But for tonight's lab, it should be fine to use, if you've got 2.1.300 or later, you're going to want the C# extension in Visual Studio Code. And it is optional to have NPM installed, but I put it up here because it is the official way to get the SignalR client libraries. When we get to that step, I have a workaround that's perfect for a lab, but you'll want to figure out how to work it into how you want to work in client-side JavaScript to a production tool chain and workflow. That's always an issue. Anybody who's doing JavaScript on the client side, your team might have come up with some fancy, maybe following a pattern or blazed your own trail. You might love it. You might hate it. It's the JavaScript world, right? So let me bring over Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to for now move this to another screen where I can see it. So here's Visual Studio Code. I happen to have the latest one. I don't believe the absolute latest is going to be required. I'm going to close this folder so that it's completely blank. And I'm going to open a command prompt. This is going to be nice and loud. It's going to be an administrator command prompt. Can everybody see that font size okay? If not, maybe I should do it the other way. If you can't, yell at me now. All right, and I like to put things in a source folder, put it in your favorite spot. And what I'm going to do before we get started is I'm going to do some double checking. So you can always double check what version of .NET you have by doing .NET, the command line tool for .NET Core, -- version. And I have 2.1.302, so I'm good there. If you aren't good, I did put a download link on GitHub. You want to make sure you're at least 2.1.300. I don't see a lot of people scrambling with their mouse. And then once again, the C# extension. So in Visual Studio Code, we have this bar with our 5 major icons. And under extensions, you can see I do have C# installed. Doesn't come by default with the product. And you'll want to make sure that, you'll get prompted for it the first time you do some C# stuff. So, all right. I mentioned NPM. I'm not going to go into NPM. You'll see why I mentioned it later. The way you get NPM nowadays is by installing Node.js, and if you take the LTS or later, you should be fine. Does anybody else hear an echo, or is that just me? Okay. So I wasn't sure. So we're going to start off from the command line. We should be able to build the skeleton of our project just by typing .net new. And I'll go back into this command in just a little bit for folks who haven't been to previous labs. We're saying that we want an MVC template. And I'm going to use the -O to say, I don't want you to put the files in this folder. Can you put it where I specify? If I don't do this -O, it's going to put them right here. And I like this to be my root source folder. So you can either make the folder, go there, do .NET new MVC, or you can do this, where I'm going to say SignalR lab, and I just kept it all lowercase. I don't think there will be any consequence to that, but namespaces are a funny thing, and you never know if you put Fred, if you might not get, we might have a namespace issue later. So keep that in mind. If you say, hey, I did Fred's code, and Chris said something about namespaces, and now I'm getting these using directive errors. So this is what I'm going with. .NET new MVC-O SignalR lab. This is very similar to you being in Visual Studio 2017 and saying that you want a new project and picking MVC out of the list. Remember that nowadays, if you pick web application and you don't pick anything that says web API or MVC, you're actually getting a project that by default is Razor Pages. So I didn't switch over to MVC for any other reason that it made one thing a little bit easier for a little bit less typing for the sample, and I was trying to keep that down. You're going to see that you can actually follow this exact same lab in Razor Pages if you want another time. You'll be able to see all that. So it not only did it create the code, it even runs a .NET restore for you, and it creates a new folder, SignalR lab. So I'm going to go ahead and CD over there and even do a quick dir so I can feel like I'm almost the total Linux hacker here. I'm staying at command line for now. And here's what it created. Now, just to kind of back up and help people out, you can always look for help with the .NET command line interface by doing .NET-help, and you get a bunch of help. But then this is something that I had to kind of work on for a little bit, was what about what about help when I make a new project? Well, it turns out you can run -- help on that as well. And you're going to see that all the templates that you might be familiar with out of Visual Studio are here. They have short names in this column. Web is your empty, which we used last month so that we didn't have anything in the way when we were playing with middleware. You want Razor, you've got Razor, Web API, and these are just templates, by the way. React Redux template, React template, Angular template, a Web API template, and then there's one that's not listed here. It's an alias that's just Web App, WEBAPP, and right now today that defaults here, but that's kind of going to be the floating. My understanding is going to be the floating alias that, as they decide they want your default experience to change, maybe some stuff's changed, maybe we want to add or subtract some things, you kind of float Web App over to it. But today that creates this Razor app. You can make solution files from here, and you can actually even make individual class libraries and stuff. You can technically do everything through this command line interface that you're used to doing in Visual Studio, like new classes, new items, adding new projects, adding them to a solution. You can do that. And I think that's a good foundation for the future where this remains cross-platform. So cross-platform tools know they can count on the CLI to do the dirty work for them. So it seems like we haven't done a whole lot yet. And I'm going to open Visual Studio Code from here. The way I like to do it is just do a code dot from the folder that I'm in. And Visual Studio Code is going to open up, give me this welcome screen that I haven't turned off yet. And I think another thing I'll do is, before I continue, I'll increase the Control Plus to just increase this one time. Now, I was hoping for that message to come up in the lower right. It detected that I'm in a C# project. It figured it out. Good guess. And then it said, okay, I have the C# extension, and the C# extension detects it and says, you need something to build and debug. So like I said, Visual Studio Code is a lightweight editor. Visual Studio, you're ready to hit F5 and start debugging right now. But in Visual Studio Code, you need these text files, tasks.json and launch.json, that basically tell Visual Studio Code and the C# extension how to run this thing. All I have to do is say yes, and that'll be good enough for tonight. I get these magic files up here, and they're fine. It doesn't. You can read all about these in the documentation. They're super awesome. What I'm going to do before I do anything else is make sure that I can debug the app just by clicking Start Debugging. And so how did I get there? When you open Visual Studio Code by default, you're in this Explorer tool. There's also a search tool, a Git tool, a debug tool, and an extension tool. In the debug tool, it already knows that I'm using .NET Core. That's because of the launch.json and tasks.json. And if I just run it, I mean, this is great. Like, who needs Visual Studio, right? That sounds like a talk. I suspect a lot of times the website might come up over here, so I'll have to drag it over. So if I forget to do that, yell at me. All right, so here's where how things started off. I'm curious how many other people things started off for you the same way. So you ran it in Visual Studio Code. The first thing you got is this site is not secure. Did anybody else get that? Okay, cool. So if you've been working with .NET Core 2.1, you may have already worked past this. I left this machine this way on purpose. Let's see if I can remember how to do this. I probably don't already. So what do most of us developers do when we see this? We go like add an exception to our browser. In .NET Core 2.1, there is a major effort underway to get all of us to think HTTPS by default. So, because I'm not going to remember, I'm going to try the, what was it again? Was it .NET Cert? Shoot. I thought I would, or did I? Let's see if I got some help when I built the application. You can. There's actually a command line for this though. I should have put it into the README. It's .NET Cert HTTPS, something like that. Here we go. This is it, right here. That's okay. It's coming. I've got it. All right. So this is new in the 2.1 time frame. And so what they do is they will generate a development cert for you, and they will help you install it on your box so that you trust it. And then you've got to remember that you are trusting this localhost cert, which is generally okay, but remember, it's not real. So it's DOT-NET dev certs with a dash in between, and HTTPS after that. And oh, it's already present. Hold on. Okay. And then you have to add dash dash trust. All right. So here's what I think, and please, I may be 100% wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure the SDK installed the cert. And then what you're doing here is you're following procedure to trust the cert. Now, you get some nice yellow warning text that tells you, you're requesting to do this. And if it's not trusted, you get this thing. Anybody familiar with this thing? That you are about to install a certificate from an authority? I've seen it before, and if you've done SSL work before, TLS work, you probably got real familiar with this. It is. It's a super scary cert that warns you and says Windows is going to trust this thing, and oh my gosh, if you aren't sure about this, you are going to get hacked. That's the translation of those 4 things. But it's a localhost cert that is going to, that I've now trusted. And I tried to leave that alone on purpose. Okay, so hopefully that wasn't a complete waste of time. And I run the app again. I'm noticing that it's coming up in Edge here, which is really odd. I can't believe that I didn't change it on this machine. But here we go. See, no secure warning message there. And a fundamental part of tonight's work is going to be opening things in multiple browsers. So I'm going to go ahead and get a tab ready and show you the same exact thing running in Chrome. We haven't done a whole lot. All we've done is show that we can run this app without a whole lot of complaints in 2 browsers. Yes? Yep. Yep. Is it large enough? Do I need to make bigger? So DOT, yeah, okay. So the trusting mechanism is DOT-NET space dev dash certs space HTTPS space dash dash trust. Now, if you still get the same error, let me tell you some of the things that I encountered. One was closing the browser before I did this. Another was Firefox. So Google, Chrome, and Edge, and probably still Internet Explorer, use the Windows stores for DNS resolution, for certificates. Firefox keeps their own. If there's a Firefox expert here that can correct me, please, I'm not going to pretend to be a Firefox expert, but I have dealt with this in the past. I love Firefox. It's my daily driver browser. For this lab, I'm going to just use Edge and Chrome so that I don't have to go set an exception in Firefox. Closing the browser fixed it. Good. That worked for me too. This was enough of a thing that I tried to keep this machine clean, and I played with a couple other ones. I just figured someone raise their hand and say, how come you're not getting this?
But this issue is not specific to SignalR.
Nope.
It's to all ASP.
This is .NET Core 2.1 development. Now.
Why don't you show startup action?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're going to go through the startup.
And also,
so what wasn't found for you? The DOT-NET? Okay. Interesting. So my guess, my guess is going to be that maybe we don't have 2.1.300. I know famous last words, and you're going to say, I do. Why didn't it work for me? And that stinks. I want everything to work for everybody. .300 at least. So there's some confusion about the versioning. I'm not even going to tell you who to blame, although I know who would take the blame. It's really not their fault. But 2.1 does not guarantee .NET Core 2.1. 2.0.1? 201. So .NET Core 2.1 starts at 2.1.300. I'm sorry. That's why in the lab I had said make sure you got 300. I know it's completely confusing, but if everyone doesn't mind, let's take a look. We'll get through this, but these are important issues because SignalR released and went final in ASP.NET 2.1. So here's how you take a look. You go to the home of .NET, dot.net. That's the home of .NET. I went to download, and now I've got Windows, Linux, Mac. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just go ahead and click on the 2.1 SDK. And hold on. What I'm really trying to do is find all downloads. So I'll find it. Here it is, all downloads. This is what I really wanted. So let me, before I zoom ahead, home of .NET, dot.net. I picked download. You scroll a little bit past the flashy stuff that wants you to like click here, click here, click here, and you go to all downloads. And now I'm looking at them all. And when you look here, this is when you find out that .NET Core 2.1 started at 2.1.300. And I know, and you can find .NET Core 2.0 as far back as 2.1. The SDKs and the runtimes and even the .NET CLI used to version independently. As you can see, it only took a little while to realize what a problem that was going to be. Like, it's just confusing. So, in the future, and the future can't quite start yet because, you know, we still got to resolve this mess where some 2.0 SDKs were actually 2.0 runtimes. See, these runtimes are version 2.0, 2.0, 2.0, 2.0, were serviced by 2.1 SDKs. This changeover happened here. We've still got to live through this. When we come out the other side, and maybe there's a 2.2, we should see a 2.2 runtime and a 2.2 SDK with the third number being revisioned more or less independently. But there's even some cohesion to the 300 number. There is an attempt to try and keep together things like Visual Studio releases, not the Visual Studio product, this runtime, the SDK, the .NET CLI, so that we can maybe, hopefully, not just have happen, you know, what seemed perfectly logical. Like, wait a second, I have 2.1, what's the problem? So if you come here and you click this one, you should be able to get that installed pretty quickly, and that command should work for you. Maybe I stalled long enough. But also, I think this is good information. I struggled through this. You can see the current support. This is the currently supported one. You might notice something really interesting. Long-term support. No long-term support for 2.0. The end of life is in October of this year. There is still some LTS versions of the 1.1 SDK and the 1.0 runtime. You can see how it kind of diverged here, but this is still the first release of the runtime, second release. So yeah, if you've adopted .NET Core 2.0, pretty sure it's in October. Got to get to 2.1. Now, the changes shouldn't be too drastic, but there is no LTS here. You only need, yes, you only need the SDK. And I did that on purpose on this machine. Wanted to prove it to myself. This was the only download I took. On another machine, this was the only download I took. And then over the last couple weeks, boom, boom. So, all right. So nice and confusing. This command line, not in the lab, but maybe should be. I'll think about getting that in the README if you come back to this. But hopefully if you've got downloaded, you've run this command. In fact, if you run .NET for the first time after you've installed the 2.1 SDK, it tells you this command. It says, hey, by the way, I installed this dev cert. You're not going to be happy till you trust it. That's where I got the command the first time. As you can see, I didn't save it. And then I had to Google for the answer. Rich.
One question for the online is the company. So for this lab, it's 2.1.3.0.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for this lab is 2.1.301 It should be fine. You just should be advised that the reason why we have a 302 is for two vulnerabilities that were announced yesterday. I saw when I was at the airport, and They're not related to SignalR. They're not related to you messing around in a lab. They're related more to whether you deploy with Kestrel, and if you count on the authentication counter actually locking somebody out after 3 failed attempts. I think those are the 2. This is not a source. Don't trust me. Go read it yourself. I read this on a phone in the airport. But you should be fine today. Thank you very much for that question. I'm glad you're here joining us. Okay, so now we can get started. And if you're joining us late, everything can be found on github.com, philly.net. You can find our hands on lab numbered by date, year, and month. And I'm just going to go through this, but I'm going to stop to explain. So if you fall behind, want to move ahead, you might already be done. Let's get started now. So what are we going to do? We already talked about how when you open the code for the first time after creating your MVC app, the C# extension jumps in and says, hey, I need some help for you to build this. That dialog looks like this. You've clicked yes, and then we just all wanted to make sure that this thing works. So that's how we got sidetracked. I knew that was going to be a biggie. So what do we want to do? The first thing we want to do is, looking through this code, we are going to delete the view, that fancy looking cool view that this thing started with. That thing, we don't need it. It's too much. So how do you do that? You go to the views folder. So in Visual Studio Code, I can click on this arrow. I can click on the word views and it expands. And I see the whole folder. And what I really need is I need the home folder, because we're going to get rid of the index view. We're going to replace it. And so this is where I was talking about, this is where I actually did lie a little bit. You don't have to be familiar with Git, but you will be happy if you download this zip, because we are going to use some files out of it. It was better than typing a billion things. So if you're at the github.com/philly.net link, I'm going to actually paste that into Mixer real quick if you folks don't mind. Somebody already did it. Yep, thank you, Bruno. Awesome. Download the zip if you don't want to use Git. It's fine if you don't. There's no need to tonight, because what we're going to need is, after you've abstracted this, we are going to use these lab files. This is going to make things a little simpler. Cool. Okay, so the index that we're replacing it with, it's just too much boilerplate typing. I didn't want to deal with it. So you can delete this file. You could do it from here in code if you wanted to, by just highlighting it and clicking the delete button to move it. But now your next question might be, how am I going to get a file in here? So I think the easiest way to do it is to right-click on this home word that represents the home folder and say reveal in Explorer. So now I'm looking at the same exact view, but I'm doing it in Explorer. I'm going to crunch it up just a little bit so that I can bring over my zip file. And I'll wait for everybody. Did anybody need me to point them back to where to get the zip file? Are we all good? Anybody not good? You should be able to click through and find the lab files folder, and we are going to pick up. I'm going to right click so I can hold it and drag it on over. And then when I get my choices here, I'm going to copy it. If you moved it, it should be okay, just as long as you've got it here. So I'm taking out of lab files, I'm bringing over index.cshtml. I'll come back to this if anyone needs it, but I just want to click in here, and I wanted to see this update like right away. So if it doesn't update for you right away, if you don't see Visual Studio Code, just pick it up. then you have a refresh icon here in the upper right of this section. Did I mess it up? Did I not? Did I put it in the wrong spot? SignalR Lab. I did. Thank you. Yep. Cut. Paste. And now the folder should look like that. So Visual Studio Code was just doing what I asked it to. Thank you for catching that one. It goes into views, then home, then index.cshtml is what's getting replaced. If you didn't want to delete it in the first place, we could have dragged it over and replaced it, right? We're getting a much simpler view here. Much simpler. All right. Anybody still working on copying? All right, so you might have seen if you perused this simple CSHTML that at the bottom, it's going to include a utils.js, and you may have been super eagle-eyed and noticed it's also in the lab files. So where is that going to go? We're going to put that. I'm going to show you in Visual Studio Code, but we'll go back out to Explorer too. In your projects, in your ASP.NET Core projects, you have a www root folder, which represents public files. Public files will get served out of here. You could put image files, you can put JavaScript files, you can put HTML. It's fine. And then you can refer to these things in your MVC views, your Razor pages, or maybe you're doing an Angular or React project and you've just got a separate project for a web API. Maybe for SignalR even. There's no reason you couldn't have a React front end and a SignalR back end in the same project. It doesn't even have to be in separate projects. Okay, so I haven't done the work yet, which is to I want to be in my lab folder, and I want to be in www.root, and I want to be in JS, and we are adding utils.js over here. So once you've done those two things, I know we haven't done a lot yet. But if you go down to that debug tab and run the application, what I'd like to hear from everybody is that you've got our simplified view. And one of these days you can go ahead and accept the cookie policy. That also included in the latest .NET Core is automatic support for accepting cookie policies, because what do we have to deal with now from our friends across the pond in the EU? I think it's called GDPR. I always get the acronyms backwards, but it is a general privacy protection for consumers, and one of the things you got to do is make them agree that you can use cookies. So ASP.NET's helping you out with that nowadays. Not relevant to SignalR tonight, but this should be our nice, much simpler view. Is everybody ready with that? Cool. This should also work if you're in Linux or on Mac too, if you've played with, if you're working in there tonight. So, okay, simple view for a real-time app. So now we finally get to SignalR, which is like, what is SignalR all about? It's about real-time communication. That's what we're here for. It's only 6:34. But the setup for SignalR is a little bit more involved than everything else, because you've got to get, it's dealing with both server-side code, especially if you're a longtime C# developer, and the fact that nothing in the world replaces your JavaScript or client-side choice. We've still got to work in that world. So the way SignalR works is you have an abstraction called a hub that we will build using the SignalR library, and we're going to do that in C#. That lives on the server. It accepts incoming connections from clients. Tonight we're going to be building a JavaScript client. The fact that we're an MVC means practically nothing. You could also do this in React. You could do it in Angular. You could use TypeScript. There is a TypeScript client. You could also use Windows desktop apps. There is a .NET client. So what does that mean? That means you could have a Windows WinForms app, a WPF app, a Universal Windows Platform app, and you could get the client for that, connect to the same SignalR hub. I've actually done this before to build, in order to have that cross-platform approach of real-time from phone to, you can use Xamarin from phone to web. It's pretty cool stuff. There are other clients. I'm not going to go into them tonight. Some of those clients are officially supported, and you can find them if you go to the SignalR repo. Others are coming from the community, and there is the original SignalR for ASP.NET Framework. Included an iOS client. There was a Java client. So the community got really active about adding clients. But tonight we're going to go bare bones basics, JavaScript on the front end, communicating in real time with your SignalR hub so they can send updates back and forth. So how do you do this? First of all, I'm going to close this debugging session. I don't need it right now. And I need to create, I'm going to create a new top-level folder in this application called Hubs. Now, you can make the same mistake I've made many times, which is clicking on the new folder icon while you have another folder highlighted. Any folder, doesn't matter which folder. And if you do that, you get a subfolder. Yay! And then I'll hit escape because it's not what I want. So what I really want is to have nothing highlighted. It's even okay if a file is highlighted, but nothing highlighted, and then click new folder. Capital HUBS, Hubs. In Hubs, since it's already highlighted, this is the perfect place to click the new file button. So when you're done creating the Hubs folder, click the new file button, and you will get the ability to create a new file. Visual Studio Code doesn't know what it is yet, so it's just showing those lines of text. And as I put the magic.cs, without even hitting enter, Visual Studio Code says, C# file, I recognize those. And when I hit enter, I have a brand new blank file, which isn't quite what you're used to if you're used to Visual Studio and maybe saying new class or new item in a class, or you could even add a hub from the new item menu. We don't quite have, Visual Studio Code is currently just an editor. It is just an editor, will always be just an editor. I've often kicked around the idea of adding some helpers for folks who maybe just want a little bit more push. But that should be an extension. That's not ever going to be in the product, and that's not what it's about. Okay, so you've got this brand new chat hub. We're going to need a couple. If you're following along on the README, you can go ahead and cut and paste in the code, but I'm going to go ahead and type in a fair amount of it just because it'll allow me to walk through what we're doing. Now, you actually wouldn't have had to type in these using statements at all, because as you started typing in code, Visual Studio Code would have in fact, I'll go ahead and let it do it for one of them. It would go ahead and pop up and say, just like Visual Studio would, the C# extension pops in and says, don't you mean a using statement for that there? I'm keeping the namespace at all lowercase SignalR Lab, but I'm adding the Hubs suffix to it. And we're going to create a new class. And this is the key. You create a new class derived from the hub. Whoops, not from Hubs, from the hub. So what is hub? Well, right now Visual Studio Code says, I don't know what hub is. If I click and let the cursor live there, this looks familiar. Feels a little bit like Visual Studio. Show fixes. Cool. Using statement. Goes away. Or you could have just cut and paste. In the original SignalR from .NET Framework days, if you named your hub something hub, that kicked in the automatic discovery, convention-based discovery. I haven't actually investigated if that is still the place, because we're going going to identify that by type later. So there may not be that convention anymore. It's just something we've all gotten used to as SignalR developers. So what we're going to do is we're going to write our first hub method. And this is where SignalR is going to seem a little strange to you, because you can actually define just about anything you want here. It's a method that's going to be called from JavaScript. Yes, question?
I didn't get the in case it's showing me ASP.NET. So far, I followed everything.
Do you have the C# extension?
Yes,
So if you click on the extensions, the question was, why didn't I get IntelliSense help and the nice light bulb? If you click on the square, do you have the C# extension?
yes, I do.
You do. Well, shoot. Because I love that thing. Does anybody know? Because I tried that a few times, and I thought, like, that seems to be the on-off. And I thought I really had that nailed there. But it didn't work for you?
No.
I'm sorry.
No, don't worry.
Yeah.
I was just thinking like this time. So far, everything I followed.
Yeah. I love that thing, so I was hoping it would work for absolutely everybody. Heck, it's even complaining to me that I didn't await anything in this async method. So if you're new to SignalR, or maybe you remember SignalR, some things you might notice here, right, is I'm getting async support just right in the box, right? We had that before, but we have it in more places now in SignalR, which is really cool. And what I've defined here is I've defined that from JavaScript, I'm going to call this method and pass it 2 arguments. And by the magic of David Fowler and Damien Edwards and everybody who's worked on this since, this is going to get called. And that's really cool. So I have to use some await in my async method here. And it turns out the method I'm about to call is also asynchronous. So I'm going to use a field in the hub class that we're getting for free because we derived from it called clients. And clients is your window into communicating with the folks that connect with you, the web browsers and whatever. That's your window. But you do a clients dot and you see all the choices you get here. And, you know, if you do the prototypical chat app that everybody does, right, you see clients.all means send this to everybody. Everybody is going to get their JavaScript version of this method fired that I'm about to call. And what do I want to do? Oh, you can do several things here. So all this, there's more to it. You could send, you almost always are going to do send async, but SignalR does expose a little bit of its guts if you say like, hey, I want to re-implement some things, but that's not super important tonight at all. I'm going to send asynchronously, which is good because I awaited this method. And I'm going to say, well, what method am I going to call in JavaScript land? Now notice we haven't defined this method yet. Just passing a string, saying I want to call receive message. Now, what do I want to pass to receive message? What do I want the parameters to be? Well, I'm just going to reflect back basically the string that I got in that was called user and the string that I got in called message. So this doesn't seem like I'm doing a whole lot, and I'm not. I'm basically saying somebody sent a message, everybody else should get it. That's the prototypical chat app. But what's really cool, and I think we'll get to this at the end, is you can do much more with clients than just blasting. You get real fine-grained. You are responsible for keeping track of users. They don't do that for you, but we'll see how to do that. Okay, so this is it. We've created our first hub. And what's amazing is we created a client that we're going to be able to call from some JavaScript that calls back into JavaScript, and we haven't even written that JavaScript yet. So now that we've done this, before we do anything else, we actually have to configure this project to use SignalR. We don't get that for free. We don't get that by doing nothing. The way you want to do that is Rob mentioned earlier, we should take a look at startup.cs. So now's the time. Now's the time to go and look at startup.cs. This is every ASP.NET Core application has this, where you can both configure the services you're going to use in your application. And in this case, you can see MVC is getting configured and cookie policy is getting configured. It's all coming boilerplate in the template. And then we get some boilerplate middleware pipeline to make sure that developer-based exception page works, and some of this other stuff. MVC has already been hooked up for us, and a default route that automatically is reaching the index method, it's automatically happening. Here's the HTTPS redirection stuff that's been included now, so that even if you don't do HTTPS in your browser, you're getting redirected to it. This is all to push you towards using TLS. We're either not too far away from, or has it already happened, where Google's going to either start punishing or completely removing websites that aren't TLS next year. But now I know it's coming. And Firefox actually has something you can join. It's not something you do in the browser, but you as a developer you basically can tell Firefox, my domain that I own, always HTTPS, and then they on their side they ship a new client every time they ship a client update. From now on, they're gonna redirect that thing. So that's something Firefox does. I'm a little behind on this, so I'm not sure what the other browsers are doing or if that's becoming a standard. Well, what do we got to do here? Well, what we have to do is we have to actually add SignalR services in two places. We've got to go to configure services, and we'll do this at the very bottom of the method. At the very end of everything, we're going to say services.add SignalR. This is an extension method that got provided by the SignalR library, which came bundled with the ASP.NET Meta package. If you did any tinkering with this in the .NET Core 2 timeframe, you had to do some more adding of stuff because it wasn't built in. It was still a preview at that time. So that's it. That's all we're going to do in configure services. But we've still got to get it used. We need it to be part of the middleware pipeline. So it's not quite as simple. We got to do a little bit of work here. We're going to say add use SignalR. And this method, this extension method, wants a little bit more. It wants some configuration. We're basically building a hub route builder. And you can do that right here. It's showing you could go to the documentation, you could look up what a hub route builder is. But what you could do is you could even just provide a lambda, which is really just a function. So we don't have to be scared of lambdas. And I'm saying that this is a function that takes routes and does something with routes. And I'm going to go ahead and now Visual Studio did some magic there. When I just did an open curly brace, you see how it did all kinds of fancy formatting. You could copy this from the GitHub README if you want, if you don't want to follow along. But this way, we get to see how this works. We're going to say routes.map hub, and no, not dot. It's I'm actually going to declare the type of hub that I'm routing. It's a chat hub. It's our own chat hub. Squigglies, right? That should be a familiar reason why, but I'm going to go ahead and finish this first and say that what I want you to do is I want you to route calls to chat hub, which are being made magically by SignalR clients, to /chat hub, get routed to my SignalR chat hub. Sounds redundant, but you got to do something here. So, of course, Visual Studio Code is telling me, hold on, you didn't do a using directive, and I'll use the magic light bulb, which I'll scroll up to the top in a second. That's all it did. So if this didn't work for you, you are going to have to put in a SignalR lab.hubs. But we only did 2 lines of code in here. That's it. Nothing more. Okay, so now we've got our app use SignalR configuration here. And in configure services, 1 line of code, services.add SignalR. If Visual Studio Code didn't do it for you, using statement. If you're behind on the README, this is all under configure the project to use SignalR, and you get the 2 lines of code, and then at the very end, you get what the configure methods now should look like. So if you're unsure, that's my machine. Yeah, my machine died. Oh, Not good. All right.
This is only a test. And this better be allowed.
Come on now.
Wrong machine.
I froze very hard. Maybe I'll have to switch machines for a different reason. The one nice thing about these .NET Core Labs has been that, quite frankly, if you hand me a machine, I'm not that far away from running it. I can get Visual Studio Code, I can get the .NET Core SDK, I can run that funny command line, and I can download and I can open the README on GitHub, and we should be all right. So that's actually been really nice. So I think we're back up. I hope that doesn't happen again. Not that one. I don't care about that one. SignalR Lab. And everything. And the flowers are still standing. Look at that. So thank you. Thank you. I'll be here all night. Tip the waitresses, please. Okay, so let's so the next step was to begin working on the client. And in order to do that, we are going to create a JavaScript file here in JS land. So where is this? This is www.root.js. And you can go ahead and say new file when you've got the JS folder highlighted. And I'm just going to call mine chat.js, which is what it says to do in our handy dandy lab. And everything is good over there and good on stream. Like that all just worked, except that I need to reconnect to the event, which is awesome. I don't know if I'll have to do that event code thingy. Aha, did not. Okay, so in chat.js, we're just going to do a couple quick things that you could even copy out of here if you do not want to type all this in. I think I'll start with typing, but I may not type the whole thing because it is quite a bit. So we've created a new file, chat.js. We've got to do three things. We have to open the SignalR connection. And first of all, I want to point out that this isn't going to work in Internet Explorer 11 because I just used const. So I just killed Internet Explorer 11 support. So if you all want to get rid of Internet Explorer 11 support at work, just go check in to your source repository, start using const and let, use arrow functions, and you're awesome. You just tell your, oh, it doesn't work anymore. So I actually think Microsoft might thank you. I'm not sure about that. So you can see that I'm not getting any help here. Like why? I tried to say SignalR and it doesn't even know. Well, I know we're going to do this step in a little bit, but let me jump ahead and go. It's not too far. If we go back to the view, which is in the home folder under views folder, home, index.cshtml, we have to actually add support for our scripts. And those would go right after utils. So I've got that sneaky utils.js. And so you can copy this out of the GitHub README where it says add the new scripts to the index view. But what they are is these two lines of code, 29 and 30, where we're adding the SignalR library, and then we're adding a reference to our new chat.js. And what this should do is when I did it this way, what I found is that Visual Studio Code helped me out a little bit, which I thought was kind of nice. So if you are really very, very closely paying attention, you might ask, well, you're talking about lib, and that's not here. So you're going to find that SignalR.js in the lab assets. But I will detour real quick and show you the way I don't want to say the way you're supposed to get it. That's not correct. But it certainly is the NPM package, the official NPM package for this stuff that you will want to keep up with in case it changes. There is nothing wrong with you taking the minified version of this file and saying, that's my SignalR library. That's perfectly fine. It's just that the responsibility is on us to find some way to fit this into our JavaScript toolchain. And that topic is there's as many people in this room as there are JavaScript toolchain techniques. So, that'll be up to, if your team's doing web development today, you might already have some ideas. How do you keep up with JavaScript libraries today? So if you've copied these two in, the question is well, hold on, I still need this file. And in the lab, it mentions that you can use npm, which I don't know that I actually need to do, but you would npm init on this folder, which just creates a package JSON and allows npm to get new files. And then you'd npm install ASP.NET SignalR. So these are the two lines. They're in the README. You can look at them. I just felt like it seemed like an awful lot of work, because then you still got to go find a way to get this into your project. It just seemed like, let's just not do that. Instead, let's create a SignalR folder, and I will reveal that in Explorer. And then let me go find, I got to go find that downloaded. I was right there in downloads. Go find this file, lab files. This is the last file we have to copy tonight. Get that copied in here. As you can see, that's not my file. This file comes from Microsoft. And it's got license, lawyers, .NET Foundation, stuff like that. But we don't have to care what's in there. That doesn't matter. We've wired it up in our index.cshtml, so I'm actually scrolling back to the part of the lab that says in chat.js we're going to write the JavaScript code to enable the chat. And now let's find out if this was all worth it. No, it wasn't worth it. This worked for me. I don't know if I have to like restart or something, so I'm not going to. It might be that I have to just save this file. I know that I could be a little bit more forceful with that triple comment, but I didn't know what that was. So we have a connection builder in SignalR that we can direct with some simpler methods to kind of set things up instead of having to new it up and then like do a whole bunch of stuff. This is going to look familiar in that we said over in the route that Chat Hub would be the destination, and we're saying that here. That allows the client to sync up with that hub. It's like an awful long way to one thing about SignalR is there's a long way to go before you even get like that first moment. Should I do that again? And then you build.
We're all going to woo-hoo when we get there.
Yeah. So we have the connection. This came from the SignalR library, which means that SignalR.js file, it created that SignalR namespace. Let me call this method. I told it that I want you to go wire up Chat Hub, and it goes and figures it out. It actually makes this like super secret call out to the hub, which was wired up, and it says, oh yeah, here's everything you need to know about this hub. So what does that mean? That means if you go change the hub, you don't have to change the clients necessarily, but you do have to refresh them, because they haven't gone out and made that super secret connection yet. So now what we're going to do is, remember, if I go to the hub, and I'm just doing this to show you, if I go back to the hub, remember we said that we were going to call this method receive message? That method doesn't exist right now in JavaScript, but we're going to create it. We don't create it quite the way you'd expect. We don't just create a method called receive message. You might remember that from previous, it was much more dynamic, the previous version of SignalR. Instead, you use the connection object and you say connection.on. That's the magic way to say, I want you to listen, and when this function is called, I'm going to supply you now with a function that you are to use. I could go write that function somewhere else and use the function syntax that you're used to in JavaScript and then just put the name of the function right there. That would be perfectly fine. I'm going to use arrow functions. I didn't use the word lambda, so that way a JavaScript person wouldn't throw tomatoes at me. And I'm going to say that I'm writing a function that takes a user and a message as its parameters. And then and what does that function do? And I say, what does it do by using the fat arrow and open and close curly brace? And now I can write code in here, just as if I went somewhere else and wrote a function. What I'm going to do, now this is not SignalR. This is jQuery if you want it to be. This is Angular code, React code that might create components. This is plain old DOM code in my case. And that might, so don't get too concerned if you're looking at this and saying, oh my God, what fancy JavaScript library did you use? Except for encode string, which is living over in utils. That was just because I didn't want to have to stop and say, can I do a tiny bit, at least a tiny bit of injection protection here? You'll go, if you go look at that library, you're going to see that it flat out tells you that it's not ready for production, but it's good enough to get us through this. And that's why I probably should have cut and pasted this, to be honest, because none of this is relevant to SignalR. What was relevant was line 1. This is how you tell SignalR what code to run, which in this case is this, when the run receive message is invoked back in a hub. Again, could be Vue code, could be React code, could be Angular code, could be Aurelia code, could be jQuery, could be TypeScript, doesn't matter. I'm using the DOM, plain old DOM. Okay. So we've defined our single function, our callback function for calling into JavaScript. What we haven't done yet is we haven't started the connection, and we can do that by once again using the connection object. And I like chaining calls on separate lines. If you don't, it doesn't matter. You can do this all on one line. And I'm just simply saying connection.start, which is quite literally all you have to do. But I'm sure we're all expecting that when this doesn't work, we're going to want to know why. So you can this is a promise which you can catch just using standard old JavaScript that you're not going to find in IE11, and just throw that out to the console. Now, I have to do one more thing, and if you remember that that HTML project, I had a button on there, and that button, when you click that button, it should send a message to the hub so that the hub can send it back to everybody else. Well, we've never written any code that invokes that. So this is a little bit of SignalR and a little bit of DOM here. You can scroll down and copy the whole length of code. What I'm going to do is say, okay, document.getElement.id send button. What is send button? It's the ID of the button back over in the HTML view. I need to define something to happen when you click on it, so that's what I'm doing. I'm defining a click event. And let me just close that off so that that's nice and sealed, and all I have to do is write my actual function code in here. Okay, and if you haven't copied it from the GitHub, again, this is I'm still in DOM land, where I'm just basically saying, can you go and get me the text that was entered in the DOM element whose ID is user input. All right, cool. And they also hopefully entered a message, so let's get that one in there. And that particular DOM element is named message input. It's okay if you don't like double quotes. If you like single quotes, that should be just fine. Now this is the SignalR. So I'm even going to leave a space. That way it's called out. You use the connection object, and you invoke, and you say, well, what message do I want you to call back over in C#? This is it. Connection.invoke, name of the message, method as a string. So once again, we're stringly typed. We're not necessarily strongly typed like back in SignalR1. It was all dynamically typed, and you would actually just throw the name on there, and it just figured it out. It was magic. You pass the parameters you want to pass. So if you'll permit me, connection.invoke, calling send message, passing user and message. I'm going to go to the chat hub real quick. That looks familiar, right? It looks familiar. You might have a question about whether they need to match. And I think the answer is no. We might play with that a little bit. The reason why I think is because this could be an expression or something. This has to match. Send message has got to match the send message here. These I don't believe have to match. The order matters. Maybe we'll play with that later. I'm going to go ahead and cut and paste the rest of this in, which you can do from the Readme, and then I'll use Visual Studio Code's Alt-Shift-F to fix it for me. Fix the formatting. Do it again. And say, yeah, if it doesn't work, let's write a message to the console. All right. Now, we've already, if you're following along on the README in the GitHub project, we've already added the script. So has anybody tried running this yet? Because that was the next step. So this is where we find out. This is where we find out, is the lab any good? What did I do with the last 67 minutes of my time?
We're not there.
Not yet, but we're about to find out. And if we have to debug a little bit, I'll have to fix up the README, but I did. I thought I did all right. Did it run? Is it running? Is it kidding me? No? Is it gonna crash again? Better not. I see a little ant running. Has anybody else got this working? Yeah? Did anybody open two browsers? Okay. So I've got browser number 1 that opened. Browser number 2 that I'm just going to put here. Let's put it out of the way a little bit.
Browser.
Yeah, it's going to work in Firefox. It's just going to tell me this. That's okay. So I click Advanced. Click Advanced. And I say, click Advanced, and I say that I want to add an exception, and say, sure, yeah, it's fine. Everything's good. I know what I'm doing. I'm not hacking me. And I just want to leave space so that we can see. Let's come up here and put in a user Chris. You can put whatever you want here. You could say, finally, it's, oh, watch. Here we go. This is where we find out, right? Send the message, and on both browsers, Chris says, finally, it's SignalR. It takes an hour and 10 minutes to get to this point, right? It accelerates from here, because we get to add features and click and go, oh, wow.
Okay,
now,
1, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Say yoo-hoo, sends the message back. That's pretty cool, right? Now, yeah, it seems like super easy. It seems magical. So what I want to do while this is running is as I kind of have this as a suggestion in the README, is, well, what if you set a breakpoint here? So you go to the chat hub and maybe set a breakpoint on the single line of code. Just because then what you can do is you can sort of convince yourself that this is all actually working. Wow, what was that? English is a first language. English is an only language. Hold on. Get that in there. And we send it, and Visual Studio Code breakpoints. Remember this lightweight editor that isn't a replacement for Visual Studio. It breakpoints, and I can come here and I can look at what came in. And I can see that I'm about to call out to receive message. And you're probably wondering, like, well, what if I don't want to pass strings? What do I want to pass a complex type? That's not in this lab. I thought we'd run out of time, but maybe this is calling for like a ASP.NET Core workshop, right? Where you pass complex types. Like, why do you want to be limited to strings and stuff? You want like a whole type of your own. It's pretty cool. So that's neat. I can hit F5, and that all we know that working. So let's go back to Edge. Look, I'm going to be brave and use the Edge developer tools. This is awesome. Hit F12, get developer tools. Watch, I'm not going to be able to figure this out. Localhost, JS. Let's go to chat, and I could come in here, and I can say, well, let's watch this one too. So now, send a message, and that should, come on, do it. Oh, what are these console errors? Oh, server timeout. Oh, is that because, did the server timeout because I sit in breakpoint land too long? I probably did. So that's maybe a question some of you have if you're familiar with the old SignalR. Why didn't it just reconnect? That doesn't do that anymore. It was a decision, a purposeful, by design decision to not do that anymore. And that will probably disappoint some folks because it was cool. But what the team has said is it was very complicated to get right. It hurt everything from performance to actually working correctly. So those are important things. And it also didn't necessarily work with what you, the developer, might want. There were too many cases where developers kind of wanted to manage that a little bit more directly, maybe with actual buttons and switches on the page. And here was SignalR coming along and auto reconnecting for you. So all of those reasons, and we don't have that anymore. Anyways, actually, it's not really all that bad. We're just not going to be able to do it tonight. So let's send the message, and now I should get, come on. Oh, I'm still on this breakpoint. I didn't get rid of it. Here we go. The breakpoint hits an edge, and once again, I can see what came in. So this is pretty cool. This is pretty cool. You can sit here and step through. You can do this in Firefox. Same thing in Chrome. F12, find your file, hit a breakpoint. It works in all of them. It's the same exact experience. And then you even get some cool stuff like you could say, okay, you know, let me take a look at the connection. You could start exploring this. So anyways. So one thing that I just found that's kind of interesting is that this used the JSON hub protocol rather than, I think when I was in Firefox it said WebSocket, but it doesn't matter. That's the cool thing about SignalR. It even drops back to long polling or server sent events, which are all these other methods that have been used for real-time communication. It just does it for you. So let me get rid of these breakpoints, and we can continue on, look at some other stuff. That work? Did it blow up? Okay, I think we're good. All right, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and stop work, and we'll continue on. There's a couple other things that we can do in this lab, and I tried to pick out some questions where we didn't have to write a ton of code. Said, what else would I want to know if I was looking at this? A couple things I'll just tell you, because we're not going to see it in the lab. It's technically plausible for you to have a hub with no methods. Cool. Why would I have a hub with no methods? Well, you might actually only want to make calls into JavaScript. Maybe you're like a stock ticker or something. I love using the stock ticker example, or a news ticker. And what you'll do is you'll instantiate this hub, but you'll inject the hub context into your MVC project, which we're not doing tonight. And so an MVC controller will get the hub, or it could be a web API. Or heck, you could just write a regular old service that somehow gets notified that something has changed, and it turns around and notifies connected clients. Well, that's only going to be calling invoke methods from the server side. You're never going to be doing this. You're never going to be receiving calls. So you could do that. You could have a hub with no methods, but you still need a hub. You still got to wire it up all the way that we talked about. You could have a client that never calls back into the server, the same token, right? It never receives anything from the server. All it does is call the server, and all you would have are just hub methods here. So that's the flip side of it. You can do that. That's perfectly acceptable. But let's talk about what else you can do in terms of detecting who has logged in and logged out. So in your hub class, we have already for us a onConnected method that runs every time somebody connects. This method runs. We can override its implementation. So you can say public override task onConnected async. I'm getting a little bit of nice help from IntelliSense there. And it's complaining because I haven't done anything with the task. I haven't actually returned a task. So it's like, ah! So what this allows me to do now is I can do something here anytime a client connects. So what can I do? What can I do that might be interesting? Well, one thing you should always remember to do is make sure you call the base method. Make sure you do that. In this case, I'm okay with letting the base method do its thing and then doing my thing. Now, I know what your question is going to be, when is it better to do the base stuff afterwards? I've never done that. If somebody comes up with a good use case or a good reason, let me know. I just haven't found one. For me, I just really kind of want to know that the connections happen. Go ahead and take care of it, and then I will do what I want to do, which is almost always go record this somewhere, maybe I put it in a data, maybe I call the clients back. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to call the clients back. So just like we saw in the send message method, I'm going to say to all clients that we're going to call a method over in JavaScript land that we haven't written yet called user login. And here's where you get to find out about one of the most important, probably is the other important data member of this class, context. Context, we're getting it from Hub because we derived from Hub, and there are a lot of goodies in here. There is probably the best, some of the better ones are the connection ID. So now you can start associating people that log into your site with a connection ID. You could say, hey, this was actually Chris or Rob or Bill, and you don't just have to guess by the woohoo message. You can get the user's claim principle. Pretty cool on the Windows side. If you're using Windows authentication, grab this and you'll know exactly who they are. You don't even have to leave. You're in the comfort of your Active Directory land, right? Or I'm going to use the connection ID. It's just a string. You don't get to control it. You don't get to change it. You don't get to set it. This comes from SignalR. And I'm just basically gonna throw that string back out to user login land. And then because I am required to return a task, I'm gonna say the task completed. That's it. Nothing special. Just here, can you return a completed task? Yeah, good. So that takes care of adding an onConnected async method. We have to go back to chat.js now to wire this up. And a good place to do it is here before you connection.start. In fact, in the old SignalR, if you didn't put your invoke methods beforehand, they didn't work. I actually haven't tested that in this case, but why don't we just stick with it? And so you do this the same way. Connection.on, specify the name of the method that you specified over as a string in C#. The strings need to match. And then you say, well, you've got to give me a function now. I need a function. What did I pass again? I passed a string, just a string. So I'm going to say I'm taking an ID. Remember, I'm just doing this in place here. This is the same thing as writing a function, except that it's like, the cool kids like it, the JavaScripty folks. They say, just put the function right there by saying it's a one parameter function that does what. And again, since none of this is SignalR based, you can cut and paste it out of the Readme, which just basically is going to say, we're going to create a second list over in the view, and we're going to put these status events in the list. So this connection just joined. All right, anybody not good? Okay, so from here, we do have to go back to the view, which you're going to find in the views folder, index.cshtml, because we're basically going to make a carbon copy of this guy right here, from lines 20 to 25. It's the exact same thing. You can paste it right out of the README right in front of you, but it's the same thing. except if you noticed back in that DOM code, I said that we were going to update the status list. So all I'm really doing here is I took an unordered list, because they're real easy to deal with in JavaScript. I took an unordered list and I said, okay, in JavaScript code, get me that unordered list, and then let's add an li to it. That's it. I've also done this kind of thing where I've taken a multi-line text area and basically added like a BR tag and then the new text and a BR tag and the new text, and that gets you something that feels a little bit more like IRC chat. But what I liked about this is that this code wasn't overwhelming, because we don't really want to care about this. This is what to do. This is not SignalR. This is plain old DOM code. This could be your React code that creates a new component. Could be Angular code that creates a new component. Could be anything. So I've done this the same way. I've wired up two functions that are getting called from the hub, and just basically said, here's a function with two parameters that does this, and here's a function with one parameter that does this. And if we look back at the hub, we can see that all we're doing is when somebody connects, we're just going to say they logged in. That's it. If you haven't run it already, you should be able to. I'm going to, yeah. Kind of letting it do its thing here, which I think it's really, nope, because, okay, I missed something because it didn't actually fire. The login. Look at that. Is that really it? Is that really it? That would be cool. I would be very happy if that was really it. Yes. Cool. So when the first connection joined, when I refreshed, because I obviously worked JavaScript, so I refreshed, and the connection event went off in the onConnected, and so the first user got the notification about himself. The second user only got notification about himself because he wasn't around. We didn't do any tracking, so that's important. Some people ask me, the SignalR track event state, maybe things like messages? Nope, that's on you. That's something you do. There also is no state object. Do any of you remember the state object where you could hang your own custom variables off of the hub? And that is also gone. It was another thing that a lot of folks didn't use, slowed down performance, broke every now and then, and a lot of folks said, like, I'm handling it myself anyway, just stop. So if I wanted this to be, truly persistent, I would need another mechanism to store these things. I could do it in this app. It could be a third-party service that I write, another service. There's literally a ton of ways to do it. But I would have to give my client-side code a way to say, give me the list of the current list of things. That could be another SignalR method. That's perfectly fine. First call in and say, get me current list. Could be a web API call. There's really a lot of ways to architect this. I'm not trying to say that there's one way to do it. If he refreshes here, this is his first knowledge of himself joining is all he knows, Firefox, but Edge is still noticing that people are joining. And this is down in our status area, because if I type here, this was our other chat area. So we just have these two areas side by side. They're not different at all. This code is basically the same. And so was the code for the JavaScript, and so was the code, for the view. So as you scroll down and we say detecting a new disconnection, we're going to do this again, because we're going to talk about the disconnected method. And this is going to look super familiar. First thing that you might notice is, hold on a second, disconnected takes an exception. I have not yet gotten this to fire. I've got to find some way to do it. I even even if I just close the browser, I thought, well, maybe this will be an exception filled with like user left, but it's not. I'm sure when bad things happen, that's going to be filled with an exception. The rest of the time, it's filled with null. And like I said, I was hoping to find something. I wanted to show you folks something to expect there. I haven't yet. So, oops. So on disconnected async and pass the exception again. And then again, I think all we're going to do this time is we're going to say send async. And we're going to call another function that we haven't written yet, user logout. And we're going to pass it the same connection ID. Because we haven't written any code to put these into a list or anything like that. Something that we would keep. And then because this method requires me to return a task, I'm going to say task is completed. Looks pretty familiar, right? Except that the disconnected method takes this exception. I couldn't get one to drop in here. But this time we're going to call user logout. And if you've scrolled down just a little bit, you're going to see the codes right there to paste into chat.js. Looks a lot like the previous code. So you could literally take this and paste it. Take from 12 to 16 the user login stuff and paste it. And all you'd have to do is change the word joined to left and change login to log out. Now, if you didn't want to use two functions, you don't have to. I mean, you could, you know, these are your own methods to define. I don't know how else you would do it. I mean, maybe a bool or something. If you said, hey, I'm repeating code, that's totally your call on how to architect it. That's not what this is about. So we have, anybody not ready to try it? Or maybe has already tried it. Has anybody already tried it? Did it work? I have to refresh here, and so the join things work, those work, but every time I'm refreshing, do you see how SignalR notices that this hrec connection ID is about to leave just by refreshing? So it figures it out pretty quick. And so current connection ID of SZ8 right here is joined. I'm going to close it, close the browser, and it's already left. So you can detect these things. You could maybe have a status of who's logged in and who's not. Maybe this is a task management system where tasks are being supplied by a third-party service, some other service you have. So that's getting filled up on people's screens, and then you're using the connection ID to determine who is accepting the tasks, who's working on them, who's adding comments to them. So connection ID is super helpful. You get that off of context. This is going to be a very important object, just like clients. Clients and context, and connection ID will be a big one. Like if you didn't want to just pass the string, maybe you wanted to say, yeah. Do you mean a string or something else? Yeah. So I would say there's a couple things you could do. One is, if it made sense, it could just be another parameter. If that made sense for your application, if you felt that passing the ID plus a parameter makes sense, then you would go over to your chat.js, and this method would now have to accept two parameters. That's one way. Another way is you could say, you know, I'm going to wrap this up into my own complex type. It doesn't have to be a string. This could be something of Joe's type. Pass that, and then over here, you unwrap it. You're going to get this unwrapped object that you can dot into that should be composed of strings and numbers and stuff by the time you drill down. You get, at some point, it does have to drill down into, and most complex objects do eventually drill down into strings and numbers and whatever, or bools or something. So there's a couple ways to do it, but you're in control here. You know, we have a receiving method with two parameters and one with one, and that was on purpose so that you could see that this is for you to declare. You decide when you build the hub And the only thing you have to get right is your calls to it send the same number of parameters. So we're not talking about this super strictly strongly typed environment that you might be hoping for using this client's API. I gotta put this back the way I found it, didn't I? Don't I? So the last thing that I want to look at that I think might be helpful and doesn't require a whole lot of code is so far all we've done is reflect answers back, right? We've basically said, okay, I got a message from a client, so all I did was turn around and reflect it back to clients.all. Well, it turns out you're probably gonna have a lot of cases where you don't want it to go to clients.all. In fact, that connected message is kind of useless to the connecting system. Like, I've connected, you don't need to tell me that I just joined. So that gives us an opportunity to expose what's under clients here. Okay, and there's a lot of options here. We've been using all. You can send things back to the same caller just with caller. You can send things to a specific client if you know their connection ID by using clients.client. And then if you really want to make your code look nice and confusing, you can use clients.clients, where you send a list of strings. And these are just connection IDs. So again, you got to talk to SignalR in its language of string-based connection IDs. And only these clients will get the method. You can declare groups, which we're going to do at the very, very end. But right now we're going to do others, which says everybody but me. Everybody but who initiated the call. And I don't actually even really need to write any code. I can just go to clients.all, change it to others, and that's successful. That's done what I want it to do. So hopefully everybody's been able to do that. This is going to refire, and I need a Firefox client. Okay, so the first thing that you may have noticed after I refresh here is the client that just refreshed didn't get a notification at all. But the client that I already had running, he saw that the other guy left, and he saw that the other guy joined. Because there's no need for this guy, he's clients.others now, so he does not get notification that he joined. That message doesn't go to him. So that's a good use of clients.others. If you need it for, you're sending to the system that you've completed a task, the client is. Well, you already know that. Unless for some reason you want to call a different method back to it, that this could be a good case for clients.caller. Maybe he needs different information. The server is saying to it, yes, I've approved your task at such and such time, and you need some extra information. But all the others really need to know is just the ID of the task, so I can go to their web UIs and put big check marks by them. So it might be a combination. You use clients.caller and clients.others. When this guy refreshes, he's not going to see that he rejoined, but the other client gets both messages. So there's only one more thing we're going to do, which is explore groups. And to explore groups, there's a little bit of code we write to put users in a group. And I spent a lot of time working this about how people would log in with their name, and we'd check them with a list, and it was just so much code. So I said, how do we keep this quick? So what we're going to do is in our hub, we're going to have this fun rule that says anytime a user sends a message and their username starts with admin, then we're going to say, oh, you're an admin now. And if they send another message, but they've changed their name from admin, then they're no longer an admin. And this just let me put the code in one place instead of like, well, let's put groups here and let's store it here in a static list and whatever. Now it's like, oh, I got to cut this down. So it's going to be confusing. You would probably never do this in a real app. But in this case, it's going to let us do this in just a little bit of code. So if I say that the user starts with A, then that's good enough. You are now an admin. All right. So what we got to do though is we've got to add them to the group. And you might, in the reality, you might be doing this up in the connection method, right? when they come in, get their maybe it's a Windows user, so you look at the user principal. Maybe you're comparing them to your authentication store using your role-based authentication, and you say, "Yep, this is an admin. Let me get him in the admin group," or however you want your groups to go. This is totally up to you, because you're going to see, like the rest of SignalR, that this is stringly typed, right? So what you have to do is you call the group, use the groups object from the hub, call add to group async, so it's an asynchronous method. You've got to give it that connection ID that we've been using this whole time. So how do I get the connection ID? I use the context object and from SignalR, and connection ID, whenever a hub is called into, it has the context of that user, and that request. So I get their connection ID, and I'm going to put them in a group that I'm going to call admin. If I used any other string here, it would be the name of that group. There's nothing special about me calling it admin. And if somebody sends a message and they are not in that group, I'll just go ahead and type it out. Then we're going to call the same groups API, and we're going to remove them. And yeah, that does mean that it's okay to remove them from groups that they're not in. You're not going to get, it's not going to destroy everything. The world's not going to end. Which is good, right? Because, boy, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that one. And we'll say remove them from admin. Oops, you're right. It's not remove to. Thank you. The lightweight code editor helped me there. I like making fun of that because I think it's an awesome little IDE and easy to set up. So that's it. Nice simple piece of code. That way we get the groups work. Except, what do you think? What do I want to do here? No, I think that's probably it. Yeah, that should be fine. That should. No, I know why that doesn't work. Okay. And actually, if I would just follow this. Yeah, the reason that doesn't work is because just because I put them in a group, I'm not taking action on that group. Like, I'm not doing anything with the group. So I need to change this code up here to say, okay, instead of, and you probably saw this earlier, is clients.group. Come on. Clients.group. And you pass the group object the admin name. Actually, it's really a method. So you pass the group method the admin name, and now you send async. Same thing. And let's do that down here. So what I'm kind of saying is in this little sample testing thingy, only admins get status. Yes, pretty sure. We could try it. After I do this once, we'll test it out. Instead of saying yes, I'm going to say that's a good question. I never tried it. I know it used to be, but there's been a lot of surprises. So, I think that's it. Is that it? Did I reach the end? I think so. It should work. And then we'll answer Bill's question too, because that's a great question. Okay, both are refreshed. Nobody saw any status messages. No one at all. Over here, we'll have Neil, because he sends a message. Okay, but that still doesn't make him an admin. And over here, oh, and actually let's just prove that by refreshing. He's still not an admin. No admin messages. So now we'll come over here and we'll make admin Amy. And send that message, and nothing, no big deal yet, but admin Amy is an admin. So let's do a couple things. Let's go ahead and let's just open another user here. And admin Amy just got the notification about the other user, and then another user joined, and admin Amy got it again, and we can go back to Neil. And when he's, when he's not getting anything, he's just sending messages. But let's say he leaves, and admin Amy is the only one who got the message. So how could I use this? I could use this, besides with the groups, even in this admin case. The connection IDs aren't super useful, but But you can think of some admin functions where you want to know who is connected to your task reading app or your game, right? SignalR is definitely a choice for real-time games. Let's answer Bill's question. I like that question. So we've created a group, admin. Let's go change it to lowercase and run. And I'm gonna have to refresh all those clients, which is fine. Okay, we'll refresh here. Everybody seems happy and refreshed. I haven't refreshed Airline Amy yet. Admin Amy. I threw out the Weird Al reference there. Anybody possibly knew that, I would be super impressed. So, okay, so here we go. Refresh here. I've noticed that Firefox is a little weird about that stuff, but we'll send the message so that way she's now an admin. You got to do that first because of our weird implementation. And then I want to make sure we can see the statuses. So let's kill this, and nothing is happening. It looks like it's case sensitive.
Well done, Amy.
Yep. All right. So, a couple things. If you want to do this again, we have github.com/philly.net, and you get this wonderful website with our 2018-07 hands-on lab. You can go through this whole README again. I think it was pretty accurate. Did anybody double check the README for me? Did I miss anything? I'll come to a question in just a second because there is one. Oh, you did? Okay, cool. Well, I mean, if you followed me or if you followed the README, you can do it again. A couple other things you might want to be aware of is this project was partially inspired by the docs, which I kind of like doing because it means you can go here and get more information. So you're going to see this is a very similar app, although it's been updated, and I guess I could probably send them a pull request if I think about it.
I think we need a muted golf clap for Chris putting all these docs together.
So that's it.
This is Chris' first time putting docs on GitHub, and I'm being a golf announcer.
Yeah, but now so we're working with this GitHub thing. This is going to take some work. I don't think we're going to talk about this. I don't think this pattern of repository per month will last very long because this will get crazy in about a year and a half. So we'll think through that. But when you come here, we'll try our best to make this very easy and descriptive so that you can click. If you missed the lab, if you watch on Mixer, you can follow along. I hope it worked out well.
Okay,
Please let us know what you think about this.
So since Chris has this screen up, how many of you really consider yourself GitHub experts?
Oh, sorry, I forgot. I was supposed to do that.
He is, but a lot of us aren't. Microsoft just invested heavily, and obviously they're the largest user of GitHub. But if you saw in my email today, we've decided after we're done the ASP.NET, we're just going to have a couple labs on GitHub and see if everybody can really. We did this about 2 years ago, I think. We actually had you, and that was one of our prouder moments. I remember when we were over in the other classrooms when Rob and Chris and I had everybody like hands-on building projects and checking into to a group repository. That was good, but we're gonna really clean this up. And if you have anything in specific that you want to learn, let us know, and we'll put together a series of labs and see if we can get you through the basics. I think one of the labs we should really show them how to write a nice README file and format things. Now, obviously, you've done it enough that you can make it look professional. Yes, a Markdown lab. So does everybody know how to do Markdown?
This is it, if you're wondering.
Just a little bit. Okay, so that'll be one of the topics. And, okay.
And yeah, at first you're like, yeah, really, do I need to know another markup language?
But you
turns
do.
out-
But you do
it turns
because
out that-
everybody's using this now.
right.
And
it also-
and we'll show you how to make the source code look pretty inside there.
Well, check this out in Visual Studio Code. Oh, I guess it won't be easy for me to check out. Sorry. Should be. Oh, he's trying to hurry. Go ahead and keep talking. Where did I put the? Here it is. Okay. So if I run from here, if you want to know how I really manage doing Markdown, it's not because I memorized all this stuff. I mean, I have like a little resource that I use. Yes. I don't even remember the shortcut key to do this. So we're going to use the command palette to help me. So the command palette is Control-Shift-P on Windows and like Linux and stuff like that. I'm sorry, Mac users, I don't know how to help you. It's probably Command-Shift-P. It's Control-Shift-P, and I type Markdown, and I go Open Preview to the side, Control-KV.
By the way, that's the reason I
What's there?
close it.
Okay.
Anyways, we'll teach you all of this in a full lab. Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah. See now.
I love learning something at these things where I'm like, oh, I got to remember Control-Shift-P, and then I got to remember to look for stuff. No, let's just do Open Preview to the side right here. Forget Chris, man. What is he talking about? Control-KV, boom. But if you want to know some commands, I still think this is a good tip. So, because that's how I learned the Alt-Shift-F. Because I seriously thought, like, are you kidding me? There's no way to format code in Visual Studio. Of course, I'm not going to find it. Oh, because I'm in Markdown. And it's like, no, I don't format Markdown. If you want to format XML, by the way, go get an XML extension, and then Alt-Shift-F works in XML, because it does not work by default. So yeah, that's how we do. That's how I do things, and I include these pictures, and you've probably seen them all in the GitHub thing. And I'm been playing with it a little bit more each time. There's no doubt that you really got to think about what you want the lab to be. But when I used to go to labs, and not here. Never here, but when I used to go to other labs run by other people, I would do the lab, and if I got lost a little bit, you get stuck, and then you just kind of stop doing the lab. Or you go home and you say, I can't do it again. I don't know how to do what we did. And I really...
Well, we have certainly come to a new level here because with the recordings and with the instructions in the GitHub repository, this lives in perpetuity.
So here we are on Mixer.
And for all of you maintenance programmers, when this will all become relevant in 5 years, you can go back and study it then.
So if I open it enough times, I don't know what happens. But here we are on Mixer, mixer.com, philly.net. I also stream at SpaceShot with a dash where I'm experimenting with coding streams. And so I'm hosting us tonight. But if you want to, 3 times a week, don't forget that Jeff Fritz, our very own, right, program manager, yeah, sometimes 4, because I think he's doing F# Fridays, is online. So, I mean, let me see, where are we? 2,750 followers. I usually see 50, 70, 100 people in the stream. It's a great place to get your questions answered and learn everything you want to know about ASP.NET. And here it is, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and F# Fridays. 10 a.m. Eastern. He's a huge supporter of the group, so don't forget Twitch TV, C# Fritz, and there's going to be a lot more coming on Twitch soon from Microsoft developers. I can tell you that. So thank you all very much. I hope it was good. I hope it gets you started on SignalR.
All right, thanks for coming. And 2 weeks from tonight, 15 minutes of fame. We need speakers. And then next month we'll at least have we're going to have one session on Blazor, and Chris and I are going to do that. Again, most of the coding Chris will do. I'll just do the introduction stuff because I don't want to take the time to actually write a Readme file. So, Chris, could you put the lights up?
Can I?
Yes, environment, and then you got to hold down the button on high.